Whew. Um, Hello, internet. Hello, future me. Right now it is 8:39 p.m. CT. Friday, 3rd of November. Uh, do I usually say the year, or maybe I should 2023? I guess it's the year that I upload. But, anyways, I hope you're doing well. Today, I wanted to talk about why I think Clockwork Orange was mid. I think this is something that relates a bit back to what I was talking about before about Noriko no Shokutaku. I briefly touched on. But today I want to kind of talk about it, but only about one theme. But first of all, I did still like the film. I don't know about the book. I don't know how faithful the adaptation is. So I'm just focusing on what the film was about. And first of all, I like the film more so because of the, well, I want to say mise en scène, but I don't know. That sounds kind of fancy and cringe. But it is the mise en scène, especially, I mean the set piece basically, because of how I think it was from my understanding, the film is depicting a future, but like not that far into the future. It's like a near future. So it's very recognizable, but then some aspects of the film is a bit different. And it's weird with how people talk, kind of behave, the clothes they wear, the milk bar. It's a bit weird, but also something about it is recognizable, that it's not far-fetched into the future. I just think it's a really unique take on like it's not futurism, but what's the word, like depiction of future, I guess, which is usually like sci-fi. It's so grandiose, and or there's apocalypse or whatever, and like depiction of what future is. But in this film, it's very close to home, yet there's subtle but also obvious differences in the present that makes it, I don't know, an interesting way of looking at the future, almost more realistic, which was also similar in Crimes of the Future, right? The most recent film of Cronenberg, I think. Um, that movie also, I think, the overall theme or story. Well, I guess I enjoyed the story, but then like, well, spoilers. It's that like humans are evolving to be able to consume plastic, and I don't know. The scientist or biologist in me is like, yeah, that's not how evolution works. That's, it was just weird, like, yeah, the ending, when I realized what was actually happening, kind of ruined it for me. But up until that point, it was like pretty cool film. But what I was really into was how it seems very present. Um, like a lot of the architecture, clothing, technology is modern, But then at the same time, there are weird technologies out there. And then there are these practices, rituals that clearly show how way more desensitized humans are. And that's why, surgery is the new sex and whatever. So that, I think, is very fascinating. But anyways, my point here was that I enjoy these like depictions of future that is also very close to present. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a very cool way of future fiction, and I'm repeating myself so much. So now I'll get to the point. So why I think Clockwork Orange was mid. And so first of all, the theme was the idea of like your true self versus, well, the whole message, I guess. The message is that what should be more valued is your true self, even if it's not like ethical or for the greater good. Like, a government should never have control over who or what you are, which, sounds good. But then the question is, like, what is your real you? And I don't think you can completely disassociate governmental influence on what makes you, at least in terms of what I'm going to talk about here, is consciousness. Because I think that's what, when you boil it down, although the following point here I'm going to make is that you can boil down, categorization, labeling things is really complicated. But I guess for the sake of argument here, I'm going to focus on consciousness, because that's what I believe is who I am, or who humans are. So the point was that, like, government can't impose or manipulate your consciousness. But the issue is, like, you can never, no way there's like a black and white dissociation from governmental influence to your consciousness. And also, governmental influence to consciousness is not necessarily very explicit or even intended by the government or the collective, which is more what I want to go into. And then the whole idea of consciousness is not, I just don't think there's such a thing as your true self. There's no pure form of consciousness that could disassociate from any sort of surrounding it's in. And that sort of idea first, I kind of really came, that idea that, like, consciousness is not, fuck. It's very hard to describe because I think about it a lot, but I don't really, like, it's not actualized into, like, vocal words. So it's going to be hard for me to articulate this idea. But basically, what was my point? So the main idea is that consciousness doesn't exist. It's an illusion. It's amalgamation of external influence and neurons interacting to create a sort of like this sensation of agency, which doesn't really exist but needs to feel like it exists, so that my idea is that this organic entity can see itself as one unified entity, more or less. From an evolutionary perspective, I think that makes sense. And an animal, one corpus, one body would be evolutionary more advantageous if it can see itself as one thing. Obviously, but like at a more like less complex. I don't want to say less complex, but like superorganisms or like not superorganisms. Well, superorganisms, but in the sense of like what's the like well, like siphonophores or those what's it called, superorganisms? The like the organisms that function as one by being collective. That's, I don't know what my point. I think my point is like, if you have a brain, or one of the points of a brain is to, you know, kind of unify the body better or what. Okay, so going back to my main point, like consciousness is an illusion. So where did this idea first, you know, spark in me, I guess, is when I think it's layered, a lot of layers of different stuff, until like the tipping point was when I studied about media determinism, and the whole idea of like, when you realize or the idea is like technology, but media can be stretched into different things. And then basically like what's surrounding you, more or less, is creating your reality. How you move, how you live, your rituals, your behavior, what you think is real, you know, what you think is the norm, what you think life should be, what you think you are. All of this is shaped through what's around you. And I know media determinism was more, at the time it was coined, it was more about technology, but I don't think technology is the most dominant. I think it's a very strong, you know, it's not even influence, like a shaper of your own reality, your subjectivity. But I don't think even medium, like rituals in of itself, like what you just do day to day, is also what shapes your reality, of course. And then your senses, biology, whatever. You could even make the argument that your senses are a medium for your brain. But I'm not gonna go there. But my point is like, there are different agents around you, especially media, that it's not influenced but actually shapes your reality. And then my point is that also humans around you, I think one of the biggest thing is humans around you shapes your reality. You know, it's kind of like you know that scene in Evangelion, the last episode, or was it Shinji? Shinji is like floating in space because there's no ground to stand on. It's kind of like that. If there's no one around you, there's no confirmation of reality. So it's, I think, a lot harder for, or it will be very different on how you perceive reality, is what I mean. Like a palm tree, you know, the analogy of if a coconut drops from a palm tree on an island that no one knows exists or anyone can see it, did it really fall? That sort of idea, that you need other confirmation, and that shapes your reality. And that the whole idea of like shaping reality is basically what also creates your consciousness. And at the same time, what I think, because, you know, at this stage, I don't think there's really a definitive answer to what actually is like the physical, quantifiable, like manifestation of consciousness. And that is because there isn't. Basically, what I understand is like neurons firing these signals, these multiple signals, that each are just, doing its own message, but like collectively, it creates this sensation that there is awareness. And that sensation is heavily involved with how reality is perceived, how certain determinism build up on this, you can't see my gesture, build up on this awareness or consciousness, if that makes sense. Now that I'm like talking about it, it's hard to really put into words. But basically, the problem with trying to find consciousness is that it's not there. It's just enough things happening to create an illusion. And also, what the issue here is, I want to call it like a semiotic curse, or like curse of categorization or whatever. But for us to navigate reality, we have to put it within a framework. Like, everything has a label. This is what I was getting to at the start. Everything has a label. Everything has to have a name. It has to be pushed into this field of semantics for us to understand what's happening. I think there's obviously certain elements where maybe, symbols and language doesn't necessarily capture the essence of what it is, but it's in some way we're still putting a framework or categorizing whatever it is for us to understand to a certain extent. And I think when it comes to language and symbols, it makes it a lot easier to categorize, and that's why it's easier to understand when we see the word. And that's why it's harder to understand when we can't use words to describe what it is. But basically, to navigate, we have to categorize. And the problem with categorization, especially into language, is that it's going to omit certain information, especially like when something is so complex. Like my own analogy is that the idea of the word 10,000. When you think of 10,000, it's, if you think about it, it's 10,000 different ideas, but you understand it as one idea, as 10,000. And then, of course, you can make the argument that each 10,000 ideas in of itself has more layers of micro ideas that build up into it. And this, I think, also relates to, was it Fuller's or Nietzsche's like idea of constellation, of like constellations, we see it as one thing, but the more you zoom in, the more you realize it's so dynamic. There's orbits, there's gravitational pull, there's all these other elements that we kind of omit so that we can understand it as a whole, which is a constellation with just dots and lines. We simplify. And I think that's what we do with consciousness. For us to recognize our consciousness or awareness, we have this mechanism in our brain to categorize it into consciousness and awareness, when in reality it's far more complex, with an interplay not only within our neurons, but from all this stimulus that shapes our reality, being like the determinisms. And so now going back to Clockwork Orange, the point is that it's not black and white, where the government may impose, control over how you are versus just your true self. There is no true self. Your true self is amalgamation of governmental control, part of being a collective like society, culture, technology, media, your own rituals, your reality, everything, all of this. So that is what that is what consciousness is. That's why we can't find it ever, because we're looking in the wrong direction. And so that's why Clockwork Orange is cool. And I like the film, but the overall message is kind of dumb. There, I said it, kind of dumb. But then you might ask, okay, wait. But Noriko no Shokutaku had a similar theme with Tangerine, of like trying to form trying to form into something. Or the metaphor was like folding a peeled tangerine to a nice bowl, but it naturally opens up, because there's this supposedly idea of your like natural true self, which also one thing I want to point out is also the dynamics of awareness and consciousness. This is also the problem with categorization. We have to categorize it, which kind of puts it at a one point in space and time, but that's not what consciousness is. It's dynamics, ever changing. The stimulus isn't equal. It's unbalanced. It's coming from all directions. It's not even a stimulus. It's your reality. So anyway, so like Noriko Shokutaku is also has a similar theme. So the question is, why would I enjoy the theme more? And I think to that aspect of like what the film depicts, from what I took it, is that our identity is complex, and it purified into one aspect of the conscious, or our identity's complexity, of how our expectation perception of our identity and relationships can shape, but also can conflict with what might be the identity or relationship that could be more objectively defined, which I don't agree with that phrasing. But I think the point is like it's really complex, and with the reference of simulation simulacra, if that would be my guess, because there's so many simulations, or if not an actual intended reference, it is still referencing, and it still depicts the complexity of consciousness or identity. Whereas Clockwork Orange creates a very clear framework, in my opinion, of yourself versus the self that is created by the government. And okay, I can't be that harsh, because there's probably a more grounded political theme behind the film. I'm unfortunately not aware of the historical context, especially of the book. So maybe, I'm taking way too much of a step back, and that's also I think the last point I want to make. So I say consciousness is an illusion, and like all these determinisms, and you could say, then, so do I believe that consciousness doesn't exist? Well, yes, but no, because at the end of the day, it's, I think, perspective. At I don't complain, but like I talk about like this semantic curse, but or curse of categorization, but I do that as well. And I think to live as a human, I have to categorize this complex interplay into what is known as consciousness, self-awareness, or just awareness. So you could also say it's not necessarily an illusion, it's just a matter of perspective. So in that sense, okay. In a more grounded sense, Clockwork Orange, I guess, has a okay theme. But the point here is that it's way more complex, and I think we forget, or we're not aware, the problem with categorization. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. And I also wanted to touch on avant-garde, because I started taking a class on avant-garde. I think it's very fascinating. Yeah, fuck it. 30 minutes, whatever. I only had one seminar, and I only read one text, like a short excerpt on, or was it the whole, essay, I guess, of like what is avant-garde by Sell, I think. And I think the content is very clever. The whole text is structured in a way to be self-contradictory, especially with the flow of the text, and also the chapter titles. Like one of the titles, like avant-garde is beyond art, and that section ends with like saying ethics cannot be ethics is associated with aesthetic or something. So avant-garde is important in art. It can't really be beyond art, or it makes sense to see avant-garde as an artistic movement. And this whole idea of contradiction, I think the problem, well, it's not a problem, avant-garde can never be truly defined, because the whole idea is that it challenges, it challenges, power. And I think the ultimate power is categorization. And to understand avant-garde, or we instinctively, naturally, we categorize everything. So avant-garde itself has to be categorized as well, especially to be able to be studied. But by doing so, it's doing the exact opposite of what the value of avant-garde is. So that's why it's such a paradox. Well, that's, it's just been 1 week, so I could be misunderstanding avant-garde, but I think that's what it is, It's about challenging norms. And norms have these little subconscious conception of, not subconscious, like, assumptions that could be racist, or like the whole idea of like standard of beauty is like built upon racist ideals or like sexist ideals, I think is very fascinating. It basically kind of puts the not just bigotry, but what's the norm. It kind of makes the norm of that society naked, I guess, or reveals. That's what avant-garde tries to do, you know, or even, okay, my point was like art is like a naked version of what that collective consciousness paradigm or whatever is happening in that point in time in history, point in time and region, space, you know. Anyways, this one was long. Hopefully I was able to articulate what I've been thinking for a while. It'll be interesting if this idea I have changes or actually stick to it for the rest of my life. But yeah, I think this was pretty productive, and I guess I'll see you another time.